You're listening to Barbell Logic, brought to you by Barbell Logic Online Coaching, where each week we take a systematic walk through strength training and the refining power of voluntary hardship. Welcome to the Barbell Logic Podcast, another Principles edition. Happy Sunday to you. I don't know how it feels to you. All days are the same, right? Like there is no weekend. There is no church services on Sunday. There's no like the things that you normally do. Like you don't have bowling league on Tuesday night or whatever those things were. So I'm always like, what day is it again? But I know Principles Podcast comes out on Sundays, so it must be Sunday. Hope you're doing well in the middle of your quarantine and isolations. And we want to talk about a topic that I think is going to be very practical right now for those of us, which is everybody, who's at home. And that topic is?
Reading. And how reading is cumulative. The knowledge that we gain from reading is cumulative. I think it's a really important topic because when you think about your overall ability to glean knowledge and wisdom over the course of your life, that is limited, right? You only have so many experiences. You only are exposed to so many things. But when we read, we get to be in the head of somebody else, the life that they had, the things they've done. And that gives us the ability to accumulate knowledge and wisdom over the course of our lives and do so in a way that is fairly condensed.
Yeah.
So it's very, very useful.
Yeah. Are there people, I know I'm thinking right now of people that I've read about or learned from that, I think we talked about on maybe the previous podcast about like Isaac Newton. You think about the amount of time it took this guy to develop, geometry and calculus and the work he did in physics and all those sorts of things. Like we can just read the textbooks and learn from the guy now. I don't have even close to the IQ to learn that and develop that on my own like he did. But in a pretty short period of time, I can read about those things and I can have the same knowledge that Newton had because I can read and learn from Newton.
That's exactly right. And it's that way in every topic. I mean, like,
of course,
anything that you could learn, you can learn now in a very short period of time because those people condensed it for you.
That's right.
Which is such a fantastic thing for us to be able to do. And now books are available and, not just through the traditional media of, paper, which I still read a lot of paper, but audiobooks as well. So, for people there are a lot of people who do not sit down with a book and can't quite get as much information from that, or they just need to be up and doing things. And for those people, audiobooks are fantastic as well. There's a lot of ways to consume this information.
Sure. And while podcasts aren't quite the same thing as reading, for me, that's the primary thing I listen to from an audio standpoint. I don't do a ton of audiobooks. I might listen to audiobooks. Sometimes I do if I'm right in the middle of a book, I'm like taking a shower or I'm like going grocery shopping or something, and I can't actually read because I need to, or I'm driving down the road, then I might listen to, as a matter of fact, typically what I do if I have a book that I really like, I almost always have it in all three. I get it in paper, hard copy. I get it on Kindle, so I can read it at night when the lights are off on my Paperwhite, and I get it on audiobook because it's a good book and it's worth it, And so I want to get through it relatively quickly as well.
Yeah, I do the great books that way as well. One of the things that I think over the course of the last, 10, 15 years that I've really gotten into a pattern of reading the way that I do, that has been very helpful for me is I start with paper books. For anybody who's all electronic, sorry,
yeah.
But I still like paper. And part of that is because when I read, I'm also writing on the book. My books are destroyed when I get done. I mean, I know what I wrote on it, and I know how I've highlighted it and all those things, but other people would probably not want to read my book when they're done. But I'll go back very frequently and look at a book, or somebody will ask me a question and I'm going back, man, I think I read about that. I'll go pull the book and I can very quickly thumb through it and find the areas that I've highlighted or notes that I've taken and find the exact spot that, describes a particular scenario someone's dealing with.
Yeah, I do too. And want to probably give a shout out here to Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book. It's a great book on how to read a book. And it's sort of the strategy that you use. And I know, like for Scott, he follows that exactly. There are things that I don't follow exactly. I certainly do sort of a quick overview of the book. I look at the table of contents. I look at the front and the back. I kind of get a general idea of the layout of the book. I always do that first before I start reading the book. Adler wants you to basically just use a pencil and mostly underline. And I am a pen and highlighter and not even different color highlighter sort of guy.
Yeah, I do too.
And so Mortimer would roll over in his grave probably, and Hambrick doesn't like that I do that either. But it's for me and it works. And certainly that's the nice thing about a paperback book. There are ways to mark and edit and make notes on Kindle, and I've just never got into it. I've just never really done it, right? Like I'll use the highlighting section, like kind of highlight a section, and then if I want to, I can go back there and just see all the highlighted pieces that I've made. But it's not very practical, and so those paper books are great. I know you and I are both very protective of our libraries. Like I always wondered, our dad had a huge library at home. Like, he was a pastor and he had mostly like theology type books, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, like way more of a library. You've got a significant library I'm looking at right now behind you. You've seen my library, which is 50% books, 50% whiskey. But I am very proud of I don't have very many books in my library that I haven't read or that I don't like. As a matter of fact, if I don't like them, I throw them away or put them in a garage sale or donate them to Counsel of the Blind. And I wonder often how many books Dad had that he maybe never actually read. They were just sort of passed down from other pastors and whatnot.
Well, I actually know the answer to that because I asked him once. I think Dad was not a big reader. I mean, he liked books, but Mom was a big reader. Dad
Right.
didn't read that much. So many of those books were there as reference. He'd go in and read a little piece, a
Yes.
little chunk, but reading a book cover to cover was not something Dad did regularly, which actually brings me to another topic that I talk to people about frequently who ask me about reading specifically. And this may people may just go nuts about what I'm about to say, but it is what it is. A lot of authors will try to fill a book to a certain number of pages for the publisher.
That's right.
And when you get to that section, because they start repeating themselves, you've read all the meat of the book, you understand all the core concepts of what's going on, and all of a sudden they just start repeating themselves and no new information is given. In that circumstance, I stop reading the book.
Yeah. What percentage of books do you think you do that with?
Oh, goodness. A lot.
50, me too. I was going to say 50% or more. I read only, say, the first third of the book to the first half. And that's about where it is, right? It's about a third in, between a third and a half. You get in there, you're like, okay.
I'm probably half to 2/3 on most of those books. And it depends, right? Like,
sure,
depends on the type of book and what's going on. But I agree with you. About halfway through, you will know when they're going to start repeating themselves. And I like to just give people permission to just stop. Like, there's something about us is like, oh, I started this book, I'm going to end it on the last damn page. And I'm like, there's a thing to remember is that what we're trying to do with a book is we're trying to get knowledge and wisdom from that book.
If it's nonfiction.
When you've gleaned out, right.
And
if you've gleaned knowledge and wisdom out of the book, put it down when it's done.
Do you think that maybe that sort of thing that kind of sticks in our craw about not finishing a book comes from being a kid, where 90% of the books we read are fiction books, which you do have to read to the end because it's a narrative, it's a story. Like, you wouldn't read a fiction book and only read half of it unless it's just bad, right? Unless it's just, boring. You're going to read that fiction book all the way through. Then you get to the nonfiction book, and like you said, the goal is to glean the information from it. And so I can think through, as a matter of fact, to me, the vast majority of modern business, investing books, like those type of books, or management books, executive books that I read in business, all I need to read is the first third to first half. As a matter of fact, one of the things that separates the great books from everything else is the one that's full of information from the first page to last. It's just incredible. I started reading, again, I'm about halfway through already. Just a couple days ago, I started reading Andy Grove's High Output Management, which, if you're listening to this, if you're a manager, it should be absolutely, you should go read it. If you're not a manager, you probably don't need to read it because it's very much a management book. But that thing is gold from the first page to the last page.
Absolutely.
Now, an interesting side note of a book that is, you talk about knowledge is cumulative, the John Doerr book, Measure What Matters. So Andy Grove was he became the CEO and president of Intel. But he started with like the silicon microprocessors in the early days. He was working with the semiconductors in like the old Fairchild days. And he was like an Austrian or Hungarian, one of the two, born guys, and was just this phenomenal manager, great people person. Well, he was the mentor for John Doerr, who ended up becoming the mentor for a lot of big companies like Google and Apple and Amazon. And John Doerr kind of distilled what Andy Grove did And he put it in a book called Measure What Matters. And it's kind of about identifying like what are the major objectives or key indicators that you should be pursuing in business, and like can you kind of separate the important stuff from the not important stuff and pursue it. That book, first half's all you need.
Yep.
Because then he starts getting into like, let me give you examples of company after company after company. I'm like, I don't need the examples. I just needed the concept. And now that I have the concept, I don't need to read about how Google does it. I'm not Google. I can apply it to me. I can apply it to my business.
I've wondered, you and I have talked about this, but that may actually be a little bit unique to different types of personalities. I'm the same way. I really don't need the example. I can apply the theory myself. But there are probably some people who read books that adds a lot of value to. And if you're that kind of person, there's nothing wrong with being that kind of person. You just read that section too, and it's good. But if you don't need it, if it adds no value, obviously don't do it. Because remember, there's a point to reading books. We're not reading books to read books. We're not reading books to add them to our shelves to show everybody how smart we are. What we do instead is we're reading books to gain knowledge and wisdom so that we have mental models that help us navigate the world better.
That's right.
And that is the whole idea. That's why we're doing it. So there is a time to put a book down. And there's also a time there have been a few books that I've read that are even nonfiction books that I've read. And as I get maybe a third of the way through the book, I realize that the person writing the book is not an expert in the topic.
Yep.
I just put the book away. Actually, in that case, I normally throw that book away. I won't even donate it because I'm like, this is not for anybody.
Or it just isn't your style. It's not what you're going to do, right? So, I know for both of us, like from an investment standpoint, we're sort of passive investors, especially for like a long-term portfolio. We're not somebody that's going in. I don't need to read a book on day trading. I'm not doing that. Right. And somebody might even be phenomenal at day trading. It's just not what I do. I'm going to put my money in places and I'm mostly going to forget about it. And the more I touch it, the more expensive it gets. And so, and you talk about that knowledge is cumulative. One of the things that you've really gotten into since you've retired is investing. So I assume you started at some of the most basic. I know you and I, we read some like big time famous like macroeconomics book to kind of understand the big picture stuff, and then Benjamin Graham and some of those like the guys that influence people like Buffett and Charlie Munger and stuff. And so what is your process like that? Can you build off? Is that a decent example that you can say, I started there and that knowledge was cumulative for me?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, I think if you look at the current value investors that exist, and that's sort of the for those that aren't in this world, that's sort of the group of people that invest kind of like Warren Buffett. He would be considered one of these, but there are several. Seth Klarman here in Boston, just not too far from me actually, is also a very famous value investor, and there's a bunch just sort of all over the place. But they all come out of Ben Graham one way or the other. Yep. So everybody starts with Ben Graham and works their way towards whatever they become. And that part of that is their own style and their own way of thinking, but there's a foundation to it and it all builds on itself. And so it's another great example where you can sort of read the foundation and work your way through what other people have done and then, build your own style on top of that.
Yeah, that's good. Speaking of, one of those great books that's good all the way through is Poor Charlie's Almanac, which is the book that really Charlie Munger didn't write, right? There's basically a collection of quotes and stories from Charlie Munger, but it's gold. That book's golden.
That's one of the first places I think that I read about his mental models.
Yeah.
The concept that Charlie Munger uses is that, if you're reading about some concept, and he uses a bunch of different models, and there's been a lot of writing about this, but he uses these models to help him understand various phenomena in the world and to help him be a better investor. Overall, this idea is just that something that you learn in the field of like biology, for example, origin of species, Darwin, that kind of stuff, many of those concepts absolutely apply in other areas of life.
Yep. And
you can kind of figure out, once you have the model, you can figure out when one applies and when it doesn't. Now, you have to be a little careful here. This is a place where one model can be a problem. You need lots of models, or else, to the man that has a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
That's right.
So you want to make sure that you have plenty of models and you can sort of understand what's going on. That's a critical thing to understand as you read, is that you're trying to build a tool set, really, of models that help you navigate the world. That's why we're doing this reading. That's why we don't read just one perspective on things. We read lots of perspectives on things. And that's a topic I'll talk about in a future podcast. But one topic I wanted to hit was if you ever find yourself interested in a controversial topic, as we all do from time to time, there's a process when you're reading that really I find very, 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 very helpful, and that is to read the best of both perspectives or multiple perspectives. That's a little bit difficult to do for a lot of people because they have one of the perspectives they might feel like is a little closer to their perspective. And it's maybe difficult from a cognitive dissonance standpoint to read other people's perspective that's different. But it's really important to do because it's very easy for us to get in a mold of we think this way. We just haven't been exposed to the information from the other side of the argument. So anytime you're reading about something, you find yourself interested in a topic, it's worth reading the best of the other perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've seen this a lot, especially in today's world, with people who almost everybody has very strong political opinions. And I'm interested in, as I've read all these articles about COVID-19, about the coronavirus, like it's interesting that it's so hard for people to be objective and not let their politics come out, right? So if they're conservative, they're like, boy, the administration's done a great job handling this thing. And if they're liberal, they're like, it's a complete disaster, right? And it's like it's something in between. And it's in even people that I respect who are very smart people, not people I know, like famous people who are very smart thinkers, I have noticed like, boy, it's confirmation bias for you. You're posting these things, you're just like, well, it just feeds my political agenda or my whatever agenda. And so it's that is very dangerous to fall into. So I love the fact that knowledge is cumulative, right? These books aren't out on an island that they, like we don't have those things where those books exist and there's nothing else about them, or like you could always, the more you read, the more context you build. And it would be unfair of me to not give a shout out right now to what Scott does with Online Great Books. Online Great Books is a great business model, and you can do this at home. You don't have to do it through Online Great Books, but Online Great Books puts people together in groups so that there's some accountability, and they start with those great books of Western civilization, the classics, and they start with the oldest books. They start with the Odyssey and the Iliad, and they work their way through chronologically, not just for them, but also because they know the authors. They know that everything we know from Socrates, we learn from Aristotle, because Socrates was Aristotle's teacher, but Socrates didn't really write anything. And everything we learn from Plato, is that right? Or is it Plato? I get them confused. Somebody else can, but anyway. And so Plato understood about Socrates because he had learned from Aristotle, right? And those guys had read the Iliad and the Odyssey. And then as you continue to work through and you see these great thinkers, these philosophers over history, you can say like, well, all of these books were available to them, and we can see in their writing that they were influenced by this person or this book or whatever. And so that knowledge is cumulative, even as you work through the great courses in human history. And so, gosh, that's a great thing to do. Right now, you're sitting at home. Everybody has more time than they've ever had before. And even for people like us, people like me who work from home and we homeschool our kids, and so not a lot has changed. I don't have business meetings to go to in person. I don't have restaurants to go to at night. I am surprised, even for me, at how much more free time I have in the middle of this quarantine to just read. And so I've been hammering books, and I don't think about reading the way you do. You attack reading like it's your job now. You're retired, you read. Reading is your job. For me, I read for a purpose. And so I'm reading 2 business books right now, 2 nonfiction business books simultaneously, quickly. Like I'll read the whole books, or at least enough to get all of the information out of it that I need within a few days. And then I'm reading a fiction book at night, because I can't read nonfiction book at night because it sets my brain on fire, and then I don't go to sleep. And so I'm really kind of always like that, reading like 3 books, and I've got an opportunity to do that right now and work through them quicker because I've got more time available.
Yeah, I do multiple books too. That's another one of those misnomers. I think some people say, if you start reading a book,
stick with
that's the book.
Yeah, right.
Until that's done. I don't do that.
Yeah, I mean,
I probably have 5 or 6 going at one time. I change based on they're all in different topics, but I change based on what's interesting for that particular day, and it's just the variation itself I find helpful. I don't have any trouble going back and remembering what I read before, so it works fine.
How many different books would you potentially read in a single 24-hour period? Is it usually still just one or two, or does it sometimes
one or
more?
two?
Yep.
Yeah, two is probably the top in a single 24-hour period. I don't switch gears in a day very frequently. It's really different days.
Yep.
Where my mindset's like, hey, I want to read about this today.
Sure, that makes sense. I'm probably the same. I almost always have a nonfiction book that I'm hammering pretty hard, and I usually have a fiction book that I read very slow, that I just read like before I take naps or before I go to bed or when I want to relax, and there's no rush to get through that. With my nonfiction books, it's purposeful reading. I'm getting through it quickly. Right now I'm reading an investment book, and of course, the markets are nuts, and I'm trying to continue to learn as much as I can to steward money well. And I'm reading this management book from Andy Grove, which is how to basically steward people well at the business. And so both those things are super important, but they're not super connected. And so that's where I'm at. So let's wrap this up. What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
I mean, the big takeaway is we're in a totally unique time where everyone probably has a little more time than they regularly have. And reading is a fantastic way to fill that time, because you can come out of this quarantine mentally stronger than you went into it. And that is totally a worthwhile thing to do. So, over the course of your life, if you can consume a lot more of the knowledge and wisdom of other people, you're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah, absolutely. So there you go. Just figure out, we talked about this from the very first episode, find the thing you're interested in and learn and build on that knowledge. That knowledge is cumulative. We talked about this as well. I'd just like to be able to know stuff about everything. There are actually a few things on earth that I'm not interested in. Like, I kind of want to know all of it. And so it's really just an issue of setting the priorities and kind of learning as best I can. And I love, you and I do this too. I'm sure you do this all the time. A lot of times I just start with the Wikipedia article.
Oh yeah.
Because you can read the whole thing in 5 or 10 minutes and go like, okay, do I want to do a deeper dive on this thing, right? And then you start with the basics, and like you said, you'll eventually get to the part where you're reading the best of the thing, and then you find the person or the group that has the opposite perspective, and that's great too. But a lot of times you can't start with that; it's too meaty. Often you have to start with the milk, right? You got to start with that baby food and work your way up, and so that's perfectly okay. That's what's wonderful about knowledge, is that it in fact is cumulative, and so great place to start. Awesome. Hope you guys are having a great Sunday. Go get a book right now. You've got some on your shelf. You've already got. If you don't, get that Kindle. One of the nice thing about Kindle is you order that book on Amazon, you get that hardback. Right now, Amazon typically 2 days, might be a week, might be 10 days. That Kindle's instant gratification. You can get that, so you can order that paperback book, and you can wait a week or whatever for it. 2 days if Amazon's running on time, which they're not. But you can get that Kindle book right now. You can turn off this podcast, and in 10 seconds, you can have that Kindle book, and you can start reading and expanding your knowledge. So thanks for listening to another episode of the Principles series on Barbell Logic Podcast. If you love it, give us a 5-star review at iTunes. If you hate it, just don't tell anybody at all. And stay around for another couple days. We will see you tomorrow.